strong power out there. They want to be, right alongside us. And so, part of the reason that the Chinese is doing this is to make sure they curry the favors of all these African countries, and they're gaining their support, and obviously it's helping them economically, but I think there also is political motivation. So, if we're just talking about like the specific characteristics of, what does Chinese aid look like? I mean, you can read the four, I guess main characteristics of, how it's a little different. But the reasons why China and Africa works, I'd actually like to highlight the bottom two. And I think those are the two most important. Is that China kind of is still a developing country, right? And so when they go to these African governments and want to invest and give aid to Africa, the way they kind of sell it is, yeah, we're also developing, and so we'll help you. We'll go through the same things together. So that's one thing that they do a lot. And then the second thing is, as opposed to when the U.S. wants to give aid to Africa, the U.S. State Department will send $30 million to Uganda to build a couple schools, right? So that's kind of what the U.S.'s strategy is. But what China's strategy is kind of a mutually beneficial model, right? And so they'll be sending businesses to Africa, and the businesses will help develop the economy. They'll give money to African governments, and then everyone will be happy, right? And so that's in theory what the Chinese would like to do. And then just to elaborate on that, you can see in this photo, this is Chinese President Hu Jintao. They want to have a mutually beneficial model and kind of invest in different industries. Like I mentioned earlier, there's about currently $100 billion in trade, and that's a lot of money if you think about it, right? And so, yes.
With all the political instability in some African countries, how is it that they form trade agreements with them?
Yeah, well, that's, again, you're bringing up the points that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, and so that's awesome. I think that's, in my opinion, maybe the largest problem with the whole model is that the Chinese, unlike the United States, don't really have the morality factor when they're investing in Africa, right? And so the example I'm going to talk about in a few minutes is Sudan. Does anyone know, about what's going on in Sudan? That there's this, supposed genocide going on. There are millions of people displaced. You guys have heard about this?
Dow spoke this morning too.
Dow spoke this morning. You guys are experts on this. Awesome. And so the Chinese have invested, millions of dollars in Sudan and have tried, because Sudan has a lot of oil. And so the U.S. won't do that because Omar al-Bashir, who's the president of Sudan, has obviously accused of killing millions of people. And so the Chinese are willing to trade with him, and the U.S. is not. And that's, one of, I think, the big problems is that the morality factor is something that definitely needs to be considered. Yes?
How does the U.S. Feel about these Chinese trade partnerships with African countries?
Yeah, it's a great question. How does the U.S. react to all this? And I think that, in some ways the U.S., they're a little conflicted, right? In one token, the U.S. would be happy to see Africa develop and to see Africa improve, but, is the investment really benefiting the people, or is it just benefiting the government? And that's really the point that I'm trying to lead up to, and that I'll get to a little more explicitly in a couple minutes. And, that's exactly it. I think the U.S. Would be happy if any country helps out Africa, because there are a lot of problems there. But the way that the Chinese are doing it, I don't think the U.S. condones, and I think there's the whole morality issue that the U.S. doesn't support. So, yes. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the U.S. has trade agreements with, I think, slightly fewer. So the Chinese trades, with 47 out of 54, and I think the U.S. is, I'm not sure the exact number, but maybe 41 or 50, 41 or 42. And so the U.S. has trade agreements with many African countries, but it's not, as rigorous, obviously, as you saw in the slide we had a couple minutes ago, right? So there are exports to the U.S. and there is trade to the U.S., but it's not as much as China. And I guess the U.S. kind of has more diverse trade agreements. Actually, last week there was a Senate Foreign Relations Committee meeting. There was a hearing specifically about Sino-African relations and kind of what the U.S. should be doing. And so you bring up a good point. We'll kind of see how the U.S. is going to react to this in the next couple of years, because it's obviously something the U.S. isn't quite sure what to do. And they do have trade, but it's kind of a different nature. And so I'll move on to some of the criticisms. And so I've alluded to a bunch of these things, but the biggest issue is that the Chinese aren't really engaging the local community, right? And so instead of